The parchment said Erwick. That was all he needed. He read the rest anyway. He always read the rest, sitting on the edge of his cell bed in the grey before terse, boots already laced, the wax seal cracking under his thumb. Erwick of Caldwick. Age unknown but elderly. The sin of public blasphemy. The sin of speaking against the orderly authority of the Pale Mercy. The sin of corrupting young minds with the teaching of unlicensed scripture. The scribe's hand was small and even and expensive. The church used this quality of ink for things it meant to keep. Unlicensed scripture. He turned the phrase over. It meant nothing specific. It meant whatever the church needed it to mean, which was the whole point of a term that elastic. He had a job. He folded the parchment and put it inside his coat and went to find something to eat. The refectory smelled of mildew and old porridge. It always smelled of old porridge. Rook was fairly sure the kitchen brother made it in one great vat at the founding of the Pale Mercy and just kept topping it off. He poured a bowl and stood at the hearth, which is where he stood when there was a fire. Aldrich was at the far end of the room, talking with a young priest, recently ordained by the look of him, still at the stage where he washed his face in the morning believing it would help. The young priest kept glancing at Rook. Rook ignored him. He had been glanced at in this way for 11 years and had no interest in acknowledging it. Midday, Aldrich said, crossing the room without breaking off his sentence to the young priest, finishing it over his shoulder in a way that said the priest was dismissed. The square. Same square. There is only one square. Rook ate. The porridge was its usual self, oats, hot water, and ambition. The scripture, he said. The unlicensed text. What was it? Aldrich had soft hands. He folded them now in the way he folded them when he was being both patient and final. Does that matter to the right? No. Then there's your answer. Said pleasantly. A kind of warmth in it, even, the warmth of a man who finds the limits of other men's curiosity very comfortable. He picked up the young priest's half-eaten bowl and handed it to Rook, who looked at it. You're thin, Aldrich said. The Mercy needs its instruments functional. Rook ate the second bowl of porridge. He stood at the hearth alone and ate it down to the grey residue at the bottom and did not feel thankful or resentful about it, just hungry. Then he went to wait in the square. The market was setting up around the platform. That was the thing people who didn't work executions never understood. Life went on in the immediate surround. A cheese seller had her table 20 feet from the scaffold, and she was cutting rounds and calling prices, and the smell of hard cheese and the smell of pitch from the platform ropes were in the same air at the same time. A boy no older than 10 was selling hot chestnuts from a brazier. He looked at Rook, decided nothing, and looked away. Near the platform's foot, one of the church's runners was unrolling the day's posted notices and pinning them with practiced speed. Rook caught the word condemnation on the top sheet as he passed and did not stop to read it. He had the next name already in his coat. At the square's edge, a pair of church levies in dun coats leaned against the wall with the boredom of men who did this regularly. One of them had a fresh split in his lip, not yet scabbed, last night's work somewhere, or this morning's. The other had blood on the toe of one boot that he hadn't noticed or hadn't bothered with. They watched the crowd the way the crowd watched the sky, not for anything specific, just to know the weather. Erwick of Caldwick was already there when the guards brought him out. He was old. Not the soft old of a man who'd been kept from hard work, but the compressed old of a man who had done nothing but hard work and had emerged from it smaller and denser than he'd started. His hair was white and sparse and his face had the particular quality of old skin in cold air, the parchment quality, the skin that has stopped flushing. He walked to the platform under his own power and without looking at his feet, which suggested either pride or spite. Given the charge, blasphemy, the unlicensed scripture, Rook would have bet on spite. He was not afraid. Rook could see that from 50 feet. He had seen fear enough times to know all its shapes, and Erwick of Caldwick was not wearing any of them. He had the look of a man who has been expecting something for long enough that its arrival is no longer interesting. His hands were tied in front of him. Old hands, big-knuckled, and across the finger joints from the first to second knuckle on his right hand, all 4 fingers, even the smallest, there was a dark stain. Ink. Not fresh ink. The old kind, the ground-in kind, that doesn't come out with washing because it has been there for years and years and has decided to stay. A copyist. Or a man who had copied things. Often. For a long time. Rook stood at his place at the back of the crowd and watched the priest do the ceremony and the hangman do his work, and the platform did what the platform always did, and then there was the after. The body was lighter than he'd expected. They always were, the old ones, as if the process of becoming old involved giving something away. He uncovered the face. The drop had been a kind one, the hangman was Caldwick's own, a man of some professional pride. Berwick looked like someone who had been interrupted mid-thought. The mouth was slightly open, the eyes not quite closed, the whole impression one of mild objection. There was a smell, not the medicinal smell Rook associated with men who'd been in the cells a long time, but the sharper smell of a man who had been frightened even if he hadn't let it reach his face. It was always there, in the end. Rook laid the bread. He laid the salt. He spoke the words and ate. A blasphemer's weight should be hot and proud at the center, with the specific bitterness of a man who has argued loudly and is not sorry. Rook had eaten 3 genuine blasphemers and he remembered the particular flavor of chosen defiance, like wine going sour but with the sourness still choosing to be wine. This came in light. Not clean light, not quite, there was something genuine in it, the small dense stuff of an ordinary life, the places where Erwick had been pettier than he needed to be, the time he'd let another man take blame for a thing that was his fault, a low-grade habitual contempt for people he considered his intellectual inferiors. There had been many of these, Rook gathered, and the contempt had been both accurate and uncharitable. He had not been a lovable man. He had been the kind of man whose company you endured because he occasionally knew things you needed to know, and who knew it, and used it. But the blasphemy. The unlicensed scripture. All that, under the church's careful language, none of it was there. Just the cold coin, dropping into place on top of the others. Settling in for a long stay. 6. The thin sight came with it, the half-knowing, the deniable whisper. Berwick's hands came through clearly, copying, small precise strokes, the old right hand sure and fast and totally absorbed. And with it, difficult to name, a feeling Rook found himself returning to and not quite landing on. Not pride. Not pleasure, even. Closer to the feeling you have when you are doing the thing you are for. Faithful. That was the closest word. Faithful to something the church had not thought to write down because it hadn't occurred to them someone else already had it. He climbed down. Aldritha's cart was in its place, the horse patient, the satchel open on the seat. Rook came through the crowd's gap, the usual clearing, the usual not looking, and Aldrich turned from wherever he'd been looking and had the question on his face before he'd formed it. Clean. The lie came out before the word was decided. 11 years of practice, it lived below thought now. Clean. Aldrich nodded and began to reach into the satchel for the next parchment. Rook looked at the satchel, specifically at the folded parchment already going in, Erwick's, being filed. He watched Aldritha's soft, un-ink-stained hands move. The signature on the condemnation parchment, Rook said. At the bottom. Is that the assessor's hand specifically, or the records office in general? Aldrich paused. Very briefly. Why? Just never thought about who signs them. The ecclesiastical assessor confirms each condemnation. Standard practice. He smoothed Erwick's parchment into the satchel and looked at Rook without quite looking at him, the practiced gaze of a man whose job it was to look at things with exactly the right amount of attention. Is there a difficulty? Rook took the next parchment when Aldrich held it out. He registered the name on it, filed it, and started to go. Then he stopped. Not intentionally. Something had snagged, not a plan, not a decision, just the noticing catching up to the pattern it had already been working on without his permission. He reached into his coat. He took out Erwic's parchment, which he should have returned before the rite, which Aldrich would need for the filing, and held it for a moment and felt it, the stiff expensive vellum. Then he looked up. Aldrich had already turned back to the cart. He should put it back. He could slide it into the satchel and Aldrich would think he'd simply not moved quickly enough and it had been sitting there. Easy. He didn't. He put it back in his coat, next to Marin's, which he'd been carrying for a week and telling himself he meant to return. He had not returned it. 2 parchments. Same assessor's hand at the bottom. The same shape of charge, different clothes on it. Both of them with an ink stain of knowledge that the church had decided to call a sin. He did not let himself think about this yet. He walked. Back at the chapter house his cell smelled of tallow and the particular damp cold of stone that has never been warm enough. He put the parchments on his blanket and looked at them side by side. Marin of Ostfen. Healer. Kept old remedies. Taught them. Cold coin. Erwick of Caldwick. Copyist. Kept old texts. Copied them. Cold coin. The same shape. The same signature. The same cold outcome in Rook's gut. He moved the stone behind his bed, a loose one, the mortar gone soft, the only hiding place in a room designed so that instruments of the church would have nothing to hide. Behind it, the carved wooden bird, small and smooth, a child's toy that a woman he'd once buried had left in a wagon. He'd never understood why he'd kept it. He put the parchments in with it, pushed the stone back, and lay down on the bed with his boots on. 6 cold coins. 11 years of eating and he had managed, through an act of sustained and careful not looking, to count only to 6. How many others? How far back did the shape go? He stared at the ceiling. The ceiling had nothing to offer. He was going to have to look at the records. He was going to do it in the morning, he told himself, and spent the rest of the evening telling himself that with his eyes open, fully awake, not sleeping, until the bell rang for none and he got up and found the tallow candle and lit it and got the parchments out and looked at them again. Doing nothing with them. Just looking. Not counting. Counting anyway. End chapter 2.